Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Geopolitical Futures podcast. I am Cole Altum. With me is Jacob Shapiro. Jacob, another week, another podcast. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing, Cole?
I'm doing fine. You've been traveling a little bit, yeah?
I've been on the road. I haven't been back in front of my fish tank for a while to look at geopolitics, but I'm back.
Well, I'm sure. Okay, yeah, I'm sure the fish are happy to have you back.
I'm glad the readers also now know that I have a fish tank. I think it's important to know things about where you get your information from.
Well, I don't. That's between you and your fish. I'm fine with that. But fish aside, this isn't the Geopolitical Futures fish podcast. It's just our regular geopolitical podcast. Yeah.
Is that the cue for week ahead?
This is the cue for week ahead. We need to stop talking about fish.
Great. Week ahead. Number one item on the agenda we just discovered while we were prepping for this podcast, which was that there's a lot of stuff indicating that maybe things aren't so rosy between Turkey and the U.S. We've been talking about this for a long time. It seemed like things were getting better, but now you've got the Wall Street Journal reporting that maybe the U.S. has drawn down some forces from Incirlik, which is a base in Turkey that U.S. and NATO troops are stationed at, and that's a major tripwire for the U.S.-Turkish relationship. You also had Erdogan over the weekend telling anybody in sight that NATO wasn't supporting Turkey the way Turkey had supported NATO in the past. So we're going to have to take a close look at U.S.-Turkish relations in the week ahead, especially leading into a meeting between foreign ministers coming up next week.
Why would they draw down forces there, or threaten to?
If they're drawing down forces there, I mean, you could come up with a lot of different theories, and we'll have to think about it more. My immediate sense is that's a sign that relations really are leading to some kind of break. It's nice for both sides to say a bunch of different things and to accuse one side or the other of not fulfilling promises, or they want this or they want that. But Incirlik is really the major tripwire. If you see the U.S. pulling out of there, maybe relations aren't doing so well. You might remember that Germany actually did pull out of there.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, I mean, it's always something that you would think that Turkey kind of lorded over the United States and threatened the United States with, but that seems to not be the case right now, yeah?
Well, I honestly don't know enough to say what it is right now, but I can tell you that just the fact that Incirlik is being raised tells me that this is way beyond the usual atmospherics with Turkey, and that we have a lot to get down to, because the last few weeks it seemed like relations were trending a positive direction. So for me, this is a fairly telling reversal. It would be irresponsible, of course, to not point out that the Pentagon has since denied this. But sometimes a denial is all the more indication that something is actually going on.
Said something that they shouldn't have.
So that's going to be very deep on our minds this week.
All right, what else you got?
Second of all, and one of the conferences I was at last week was the Malden Economics Strategic Investment Conference in San Diego. That was great. I actually went to another conference after that, and at SIC, the Malden Economics Conference, everybody was basically sounding the warning bells of a U.S. recession. I'll say at the next conference, they were really bullish on the U.S. economy and not thinking U.S. recession. But I say all that to say that the Bank of International Settlements released a quarterly report yesterday in which it said there were some major credit vulnerabilities in China and in Hong Kong and in Russia and in Turkey, which isn't so surprising. But they also singled out Canada. They also singled out Switzerland, both of which were countries that sort of were not on our radar quite yet for that kind of problem.
Yeah, certainly not the usual suspects.
So yeah, we're constantly looking at U.S. economic figures, and there was actually a good jobs report, and there are a lot of things to be looking at here, but I can tell you that for us, the Bank of International Settlements is a very important source. They were really at the front of the Japanese economic meltdown in the late 80s, early 90s, and so we have always viewed anything that Bank of International Settlements says as something to be really interrogated deeply. So, they have their own economic statistics and modeling, and that comes with strengths and weaknesses, but I can tell you one of the major things we're doing this week is we're looking at why, Bank of International Settlements is seeing that. We're looking at how much Canadians are putting on their credit cards, which apparently is way more than I thought, and we're looking at what's going on in China and Hong Kong.
How much did you think?
I didn't think that much, but okay. But it seems like they're all maxed out.
It's interesting the things that you think about sometimes as Canadians swiping their cards. Anything else?
Last but not least, we're in the last week in the lead up to Russia's national elections, and I think we're going to have a piece published this week about some of the background of why this is important, but we noticed over the weekend a lot of reports of Russia very strongly encouraging people to register to vote. very strongly in the Russian sense of that term.
So strongly that they didn't have much of a choice in it?
Well, some of them apparently didn't want to and went away from it. But for us, I mean, obviously Putin is going to win.
Right.
That's not under debate right now. But those numbers of voter participation for us tell us perhaps it's a nice gauge for how much legitimacy, how much support Putin actually does have in the Russian population, and that really is important for Russia's future. Now, it's not a perfect statistic, and there are actually a lot of other variables that we like to focus on to consider what the Russian people's support of Putin is, but this happens to be just a nice one that we can really sort of say, okay, here's a figure, and does that correlate with what we were thinking before?
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Jacob. I appreciate it. On to sort of like our main feature here today. We have a very special guest with us. Our own Philip Orchard recently returned from a what feels like a decade-long stint living in Southeast Asia. He's lived there for about as long as I've known him, which is pushing on, 5 years now?
Yeah, it was there 5 years total.
5 years total. All right, so that makes sense. And so we had invited him on, and we are going to talk about Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia is great, and is also kind of an overlooked part of our model and some of the things that we look at, and there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to get to that. But in the intervening days before we had, or since we had asked him to come on, this thing happened, and maybe our listeners have heard about it. North Korea, South Korea, United States. Apparently, Trump and Kim are going to meet in May, and so I think it would be remiss of us, it would be negligent of us if we didn't exactly, or if we didn't address that in some way. There's not a whole lot we can necessarily say. This everybody's speculating right now. This how much ink has been spilled already on something that hasn't actually happened and may not happen. We don't really know. So I do want to unpack that with you guys, and Philip is uniquely suited to do that as sort of an East Asia expert. And Jacob's a smart guy too. So I'm going to turn it over to them, I guess. I have some other questions in the back of my mind. But I guess, why now? Why did this happen? Why did Kim propose this as he allegedly did? And why is Trump going along with it? What do they have to gain? Again, just lay it all out for us.
Well, here, my two interpretations are this. One option I see is that the sanctions have really been biting, and North Korea is not doing very well, and they need some more access to the global international economic financial system, however you want to put that. That one doesn't feel right to me, just because, and I agree with what Vladimir Putin said, the North Koreans eat grass. They're willing to stomach a lot of hardship. They've been starving their people for God knows how many decades now. Actually, we know how many decades.
Lots of decades, yeah.
It's been since 1950, and they've been going for the nuclear program, since.
And that's been kind of a common trope rolled out by a lot of people, including us, is that while sanctions may work a little bit better for a country like Iran, that was kind of going through some similar things because it's a little bit more connected to the international market, and North Korea is not. And so it's not only is data difficult to come by, we can only come by it, anecdotally, basically, but we've always been a little bit dovish on how effective those are actually being, but maybe not so.
Well, I think, we just have to think about it. It's one of the potential options, but it's not the more likely one. The second one is just that North Korea has achieved the objective that it thought it could, which was by doing this, it was able to create a problem in the U.S.-South Korea relationship, and there was basically nothing more to be gained in that. It got South Korea to doubt that the U.S. was acting in South Korea's best interest, and just by planting that seed of doubt, North Korea can now say, okay, the job is done, let's pull back a little bit, let's do our routine where we'll slow down and we'll take food and we'll take money and we'll continue this very, very, very slow process where eventually we reunify the peninsula under our own terms.
Well, it's worth noting too, Philip, I want you to jump in here in a second, but I guess it's worth noting too that the Kim regime over the years has done this before as a means to buy some time, and there's a little bit of disingenuousness there. Do you think that's necessarily the case, or do you want to speculate on that?
Well, they haven't promised anything. They even everything that the South Koreans have said, that the North Koreans have said in the meetings, that they have expressed a willingness to denuclearize, and that Kim Jong-un actually said what his dad said, is that it's always been the dream of the Kim family, the Kim dynasty, to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. They haven't confirmed that, and they haven't there's not a lot of evidence that they're willing to actually give that much up. So it's hard to say if they're just being disingenuous because at this point they haven't put a lot on the table. At most, it seems like that the only real concession they're offering is that they're willing to freeze tests for a while, and that's not actually much of a concession. They need to keep testing their missiles and their nukes in order to achieve a full nuclear deterrent that is capable of striking the U.S. in order to keep the U.S. at bay indefinitely. But it's not even clear at this point whether that's really on the table.
This is a bit of an apples and oranges comparison, but it keeps nagging at the back of my mind. So I wanted to get you guys to weigh in on it. Iran is not North Korea, and their programs are a little bit different, and their programs are also at different stages of development. But we did in 2015 have that historic deal, whereby in theory, Iran decided to kind of like shelf its program for sanctions relief. We all know that story. I don't think that there's necessarily any reason to think that that is exactly how it's going to play out in North Korea. But it is interesting for me to think about when this goes forward, how does that affect the Iran deal, if at all?
I don't think there's really a correlation right now. I think the thing that you could say, sort of standing back from a 10,000 foot altitude, is that, look, the United States does not want to be involved in different places all over the world putting out fires. And if you even read the national security strategy from back in December that the United States published, it talked about Iran and it talked about North Korea as serious issues. But the United States sees that its challengers on the global stage are Russia and China. And so the United States basically deciding not to go after North Korea, to go along with South Korea, to not push the issue, to me says that the United States and China are now going to have some issues, because that is really the relationship that the United States needs to focus on. So I think the same thing is probably true in the Middle East, and that's why we talked earlier about why Turkey is such a big deal. The United States is really hoping to manage and balance relationships in both of these regions so it doesn't have to come charging in with ineffective military operations every time. So I guess that's the connection, but I don't think that Iran and North Korea are really tied. But I don't know, Philip, what do you think?
Well, let me correct. I don't think they're so much tied as much as the way this as yet unnamed, unshapen nuclear quote-unquote agreement or negotiation or talk or whatever you want to call it takes place in North Korea. That will necessarily sort of affect whether or not U.S. lawmakers, along with Trump, want to necessarily let the waivers go, or if they think that actually, this doesn't have strong enough enforcement mechanisms. Because practically, what's the difference? Game this out. Suppose the U.S. and North Korea do actually come to some sort of quote unquote agreement way down the line, right? If there's no enforcement mechanism, then there's no real guarantee that Kim's going to actually abide by this agreement. And so, do you abandon it as you have, as people have threatened to, like the Iran deal as well, or do you, which has been its biggest criticism, right? That we quote unquote gave too much away, and that there's no way to actually enforce this. I don't know exactly how, but it just feels to me that that the Iran deal does sort of hang in the balance, and it's either going to fall by the wayside or it's going to. I'm not really sure. It's I said, it's not fully formed. It's in the back of my brain, but I don't see these as two inextricable issues either.
Well, no, and with your feelings and $2.75, you can get a cup of coffee at Starbucks these days. That was a nice thing.
I appreciate that.
It was nice, but again though, look, it's going to be strategic issues that are going to define this. I really don't think that what happens on the Korean Peninsula right now, I don't think Iran is sitting there watching, this is how our program's going to develop, or the U.S. Congress is different. That goes on popular opinion. But right. Look, when the United States is looking at North Korea, not going after North Korea with a military attack means that the United States is basically pulling back and wanting to rely on its regional partnerships, and it's going to try and I think rebuild that partnership with South Korea and support South Korea so that South Korea knows that no matter what happens, the United States will have South Korea's back whenever it calls for it. I think that it's the same type of deal in the Middle East. The problem with the Middle East is that whereas in East Asia the United States has Japan and still has South Korea and the Philippines and a bunch of other friendly nations, in the Middle East it's looking more and more like the United States has Israel, maybe Saudi Arabia, which is very weak. Turkey seems to be playing its own game. So in that sense, look, North Korea can be contained. The North Koreans in some ways want the U.S. to overreact because the North Koreans and the Chinese can play that to their advantage. It's a different story in the Middle East. But
Sorry, Phil. So Jacob has very politely, very mannerly told me that I was dumb, which is I appreciate. Do you agree with him that I'm dumb, or is that?
Well, what I would say is that, I mean, I think some people will point to, okay, well, issues of U.S. credibility are at stake and so forth. But sort of like what Jacob was just saying is that, I mean, there's only so many parallels you can draw. The U.S. acts, the credibility of whether the U.S. acts militarily or live up to the commitments that it makes in negotiations are so specific to the issue at hand, and especially to issues that are, thousands of miles in regions thousands of miles apart. The U.S. outlook and ability to act and willingness to act, and whether or not their interests line up in order to negotiate or go in, guns blazing in North Korea are completely different than those that are shaping the U.S. Decision in the Middle East. And so, I mean, at this point, obviously, it would depend. Any kind of parallels, we need to see what's actually. How this process is going to unfold in North Korea first to be able to decide, and we're still a long way from any kind of details on that front. I mean, I think when this news broke about Trump being willing to go, my first thought was okay, there must be a deal, because presidents don't generally, or almost ever, they don't go set themselves up for failure. They only go to this kind of summit, when they know what they're going to get. All the groundwork is done at lower levels in advance, and then they go just basically for the signing ceremony. That's not to say that presidents don't have influence over how the process unfolds, but they don't set themselves up for public embarrassment. That said, for better or for worse, Trump is an unorthodox president, and a lot of there's been very little evidence that suggests that there is a deal on the table right now. And so we are kind of in uncharted territory here, or I guess we're in familiar territory in the sense that we are kind of where we've been for the past year or so.
Well, I think just to piggyback on that, I think where we have been for the last 20 years, basically, with North Korea and the United States, which is to say that you're right. Like, Trump is unorthodox, and the fact that Trump is willing to go there and have a cheeseburger with Kim, or he's going to meet Kim wherever he's going to meet him and eat that cheeseburger together, that's strange. That's not what a normal U.S. president would do. Not that there is such a thing as a normal U.S. president, but that breaks precedent. But the overall relationship, if you look at it, North Korea is doing the same thing it did to the Obama administration, the same thing it did to the Bush administration, the same thing it did to the Clinton administration. So in that sense, Trump is getting a taste of what all the previous administrations did and is facing the same limited set of options. What has happened here, though, is that North Korea has at least advanced its technology to such a point where it was able to get the U.S. to show its hand a little bit. And once the U.S., sent the carriers off the coast of the Korean Peninsula and was talking and was basically, meeting Kim's threats with its own threats, I think you had South Korea sitting there saying, we don't want to be stuck between all this. We're going to have to chart our own course here and go forward. So in that sense, it's both similar and different from previous things, but I think the important things here are similar. I think it's still the same set of dynamics, and it's still the U.S. doesn't want to go to war in North Korea. And, that's not really going to change, and Trump's not going to be able to change that.
Right. Yeah, but I guess especially if there is no deal, or their deal isn't near, then it does raise the question of, when Trump gets there and nothing, it has very little to show for it, and if and when North Korea politely declines to hand over its nukes, where we go next, and whether that makes it politically untenable to continue to pursue the diplomatic course or not. Yeah. But we can cross that bridge when Trump takes us there.
And I would also, just to say one more thing about this, when you're playing chess, right, like, you want to be the person who is making forward moves, and then your opponent is reacting to you, right? Korea is making the moves here. Now, they basically just have pawns on the table. They don't have any of the bigger pieces that the United States has, but the North Koreans have the pace of play. They are doing things, and the United States and everyone around them is reacting to them. So the fact that Kim has really backed off, not just the testing, but the rhetoric has gone from, the U.S. drowned in a sea of fire, these military exercises with South Korea can't continue, to North Korea saying, no, we understand that you have to do this, that, and the other thing. So I would say in some sense, Trump is not in control here. He accepted an invitation. Like, he's not the one who went forward and made the invitation, unless there's some other secret thing here behind the curtains we don't know about.
Yeah, the North Koreans have been pushing for this kind of meeting forever, and but what's really remarkable to me is also how just little involvement the Chinese and the Japanese have had on this whole process. I mean, they just seem like they've been completely pushed to the sidelines. I think China is probably fine with the way this is playing out. It prefers this than to all-out, U.S. war that potentially forces them to intervene or puts the U.S. on its border. The poor Japanese are just kind of stuck, worried about that Trump's going to sell them out on some kind of deal that sort of, let's say, stops North Korea short of developing ICBMs that can hit the U.S. mainland, but keeps them with the capability to with the nuclear and missile capabilities to take out Japan. All these countries with an enormous amount of stake in the game are not really shaping its outcome. It's basically been the two Koreas and the U.S. at this point, and it's incredible to watch South Korea, at least publicly, orchestrate all this.
Well, I don't want to cut y'all off, and we can talk about this for a lot longer if we want to or if we need to. But you brought up Japan, and that it kind of is like a natural transition because, like, obviously the United States has been like Japan's security guarantor for a long time, and the United States is a security guarantor in the region. And that's true to some degree of Southeast Asia and some of these little islands of the Philippines, things like that. So you brought up China and sort of like the risk it poses. It's been expanding in the South China Sea, as we all know. It has, very, very long historical ties. Some somewhat friendly, some more acrimonious. Many of them financial with these countries in Southeast Asia. So maybe this is a natural time to sort of transition into Southeast Asia, and I guess. So, because it is kind of overlooked, I think it might be good to just kind of start at ground zero right here and say, like, what is Southeast Asia? Why is it unique? What is its relationship with China? How does it fit into our model?
Sure. So I mean, I was thinking about trying to reflect on some of the main takeaways I had from living there for 5 years in total now, and one of them was definitely the way the region is responding to the rise of China, Japan starting to push itself out, and just how distant the U.S. feels. It changes from country to country, and all these countries are responding to China differently. But one remarkable thing, it's just you get a sense of how inevitably disruptive the rise of China is. You see that just at any high-profile tour site in Bangkok or at Angkor Wat in Cambodia or in Halong Bay in Vietnam. There's busloads, plane loads of Chinese tourists coming in. It's exciting. You're excited for them. A lot of them are coming from sort of interior cities that you've probably never heard of, or that I study China for a living, and I also have to pull it up on my phone to see where this city of 9 million people that I've never heard of is, it's exciting. But with that many people coming, that at that scale, it's just disruptive. It's stressing the ability of these countries to cope, the infrastructure, hotels, and so forth. And it's sort of a metaphor, I guess, for like China's rise in general. Whatever intentions you ascribe China, whether you see it as trying to act in the best interest of the region, or acting with some sort of nefarious motives, it is just inevitably disruptive. So in Bangkok, where I was living for the past 2.5 years, that's luxury high-rise condos going up all over the place. Most of them are about a third to a half empty. Quite a few of them are it's just units being bought up by Chinese investors who are nervous about the Chinese economy and looking to park their money and hard assets anywhere they can. That each one of those buildings that goes up, it displaces a neighborhood, it warps the local housing markets, it changes all sorts of stuff. And so just the scale of China in all things is forcing these countries to react in certain ways. That said, it's not all negative. A lot of it's positive. I mean, it's injecting the region with capital, with cheap goods that improve standards of living, with infrastructure investment and so forth. But all these countries don't know quite yet how to respond to it, especially since they don't know how to read China's, intentions, especially on assertive issues, and especially because the U.S. and feels so distant.
Well, they don't know, you say, but maybe even if they did know how to react or how to respond, what can they possibly do? Because it's worth pointing out that Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Myanmar. These are not particularly affluent countries, and they need Chinese investment, whether they like it or not. And they know that there's going to be like some strings attached, and there's going to be there's going to be some earmarks, and they're going to have to get some Chinese workers and things like that. And that kind of prevents them from acting probably as truly independent as they want to. But you said each one is going to respond a little bit differently, and that's fair enough. But can you give us sort of a generalized sense of how some of these countries receive some of that attention, whether it's wanted or not, and what can they do about it even if they don't like it?
I mean, it definitely changes depending on how close the country is to China and whether or not it's engaged in any kind of territorial dispute, obviously. But even then, it's none of the, I would say very few of these countries have any interest or any desire to pick a side. We wrote about this a little bit last week with Indonesia, but everyone ideally would take Chinese investment, would take...
Actually, let's take a step back. Why is it hard for them to pick sides? Let's dig into that a little bit.
Because they're benefiting so much from Chinese investment and from Chinese tourists. They bring a lot of money from Chinese attention to the region. That said, they are very wary of China's ability to act coercively, to attach strings to its investments, to push its weight around in the South China Sea and so forth. So they do not want to end up in a situation where they're basically puppet states, or they're overly reliant on the Chinese. So what they're doing is, in large part, is they're reaching out to Russia, they're reaching out to Japan, they're reaching out to the U.S., but they're uncertain about how willing the U.S. is to continue to engage or continue its traditional role, which is as a giant consumer market for exports from the region, while also floating and helping these nascent militaries kind of get their feet under him.
Jacob, jump in here.
Well, yeah, I think Philip has actually put his finger on something that is really hasn't happened as I can see it in the last couple hundred years, because there's a major shift going on here with China. I don't think it's actually that hard to read China's intentions. China historically basically always had everything it needed within the various empires or whatever you that were inside of China, and it wanted patronage and it wanted people to accept China's role as the center of the universe. But China really didn't have to go abroad in order to get what it needed. What has happened in the last, let's call it 70 to 80 years, is that China has grown astronomically, its population and its economy. Some of what it needed to do that meant that a lot of its arable farmland was no longer there. It outstripped sort of the natural resources that are in China that it can depend on. So what you see is China is importing food. It is fishing in waters that, China may have claimed it on a map before, but it actually needs to get the fish from the waters to feed the Chinese people. It is importing more oil from the Middle East, and it needs those sea lanes that are part of Southeast Asia and part of that landscape to be open. So this is really, it's transformative because, in the past, sort of China was self-contained. It was Japan that was the one having to reach out to secure those sea lanes. There was a reason Japan went for Southeast Asia in World War II, right? One of the reasons that we have a forecast of Chinese-Japanese competition is because for the first time you have a strong China, a strong Japan, and both more dependent on imports. So when you're looking at China and how China is looking at Southeast Asia right now, it's not just about defense, it's not just about security, it's not just about influence abroad. It's also about, we have a strategic need for some of these resources. We have a strategic need for some of these countries to be more friendly to our interests than the others. And you could even say if China doesn't get it the way that it wants, in a peaceful way, China still needs to consume the food and the resources and things like that. So if you're a Southeastern Asian country and you see this Chinese monster to your north that is starting to consume all of the stuff and values some of the resources of your own country, then you do have to think, well, am I going to go back to the Japanese? Am I going to go to the U.S.? I mean, that's for me the major change and the real question.
Right, but it's not just like a mine from which China extracts stuff. It is largely that too. But they are investing in these countries and putting large scale infrastructure projects. Now, whether that's going to secure some of China's strategic interests kind of remains to be seen. But they're also they are actively doing things quote unquote beneficial good things for these countries as well, which makes it kind of a little bit difficult. Philip, you're nodding your head a lot. What's going on?
Oh, I was just thinking about how exactly what both of you guys are saying is playing out in the Philippines. It's
I wanted to bring up Philippines, so I'm glad you said that.
so. I mean, our view is that China is the ultimate way, the best way for them to break out of what we call the first island chain, the chain of islands running from Japan basically down to Indonesia, which ostensibly can block China's access to the Pacific Ocean if occupied or if they allow like U.S. warships to have bases there, is to forge some kind of political arrangement with a country like the Philippines that where the Philippines would agree not to allow the U.S. ships to be based there and allow the Chinese to do whatever they need to do to get to the Pacific. So in one sense, you could say like, okay, well, so that's why all this massive amounts of investment that China's been pouring into the Philippines, that's the goal. At the same time, China's been making it absolutely clear that they're not going to back down in the South China Sea, and I think the point that they're trying to make is like, no, this is ours. We will absolutely do whatever is needed to secure our interest in these strategically invaluable waters. And here's a lot of investment to make it go down easier, basically.
Well, yeah, and just, it's funny that we're talking about China this way because China actually has a lot of experience of its own with this, right? Because when the Qing dynasty was falling apart and it was the late 1800s, you had a lot of foreign countries that were building infrastructure in China. Like Russians owned the railroads and Japanese owned the railroads, and everybody thought that, okay, well, if we own the infrastructure here and if we build the infrastructure, we're going to have influence, we're going to be able to exact economic gains for our own country. That was true for a long time until the Chinese people stood up and Mao stood them up and took over the country and said, no, China's going to be strong now, and then China radiated outwards. So when we think about what China is doing, it's a delicate game. Like, yes, China will do whatever is necessary in the South China Sea to defend its interests, except actually attack the United States Navy because it can't handle a fight with the
which is not in its interest
U.S.
to
Navy.
destroy. Yeah, so
China is not at the point yet where it can dictate terms to any of these countries. So, just the fact that China wants to build a bridge or a port in this, that, or the other place really doesn't accomplish much because, China has also had experience in Southeast Asia with not getting the outcomes that it wanted. It was also involved in Vietnam in its own ways and didn't exactly get what it wanted after the U.S. was gone from there. So just to say that a lot of what you're seeing China do right now, they're thinking long term. They're setting themselves up for, okay, once we have developed the military capabilities and once Xi has fixed all these problems in the economy that he needs to become a dictator to fix, we need to make sure that we have good relations with these countries, even though they're going to have a natural suspicion of us, because if you just look on paper and you forget about the United States for a second, China really is the country with the most power in the region. So that's why so much of what's going on here, if you're looking at this region, what's important is what are the countries that China is succeeding in developing those more positive political relationships with, and then the flip side of that is what is the current pace of China's internal reforms, what is the pace of the modernization and advancement of its military technology so that it can stop threatening to defend its interests, and then when it decides to, actually defend them.
Okay, which countries are those then?
Which countries are?
You asked, defining like which countries like it is sort of like successfully building these relationships with. Like, give us some examples of which ones those are and which ones are not.
Well, I mean, Philip pointed out the Philippines, which is a funny statement right there, but the Philippines...
Because of his name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for telegraphing. Yeah. Was that a funny pun? I didn't get it.
It wasn't a pun, and it wasn't funny. It was, sometimes you need to explain a punchline and to really deprive it of any sort of landing.
Yeah, that's what I like to do. Like my humor sneaks up. Well, okay, we won't go there. But the Philippines, though, is really accepting checks from everywhere. They still have a U.S. defense treaty. They still accept, checks from Japan, checks from China. They're open for business. Philip, what are some other countries that you're sort of thinking about?
No, I mean, the only two countries I'd say that are firmly in the tank for China at this point are Cambodia, which is China, which isn't the most strategically important country, but China has sort of successfully bought a reliable boat in ASEAN or Association of Southeast Asian Nations and other international forums where occasionally it's handy to have someone carrying your water, and to a lesser extent, I guess Myanmar, which is I guess that's like China has succeeded in tightening its grip over Myanmar doing so reluctantly because China has all sorts of leverage over it, but everybody else is very much trying to balance between like we were talking about earlier, keep everyone. Take Chinese investment for specific projects, but avoid over-reliance. And the big counterplayer here is Japan, which invest, with much less likely to invest with strings attached, and also is sort of a steadier economy and has much deeper historical business links throughout the region. Japanese firms have been setting up factories all over Southeast Asia, but especially in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and so forth, for decades now. And
well, yeah, and just, one thing and I haven't actually thought about it this way before, but if you also just look at a map and you see where Southeast Asia is, what surrounds Southeast Asia are basically 3 islands, okay? Japan is one of them, Philip just mentioned. Then you've got Australia, which is, a very respectable power in its own right. And then you have India. Not technically an island, but when it's the Indian subcontinent. If you look at a map, the Himalayas sort of separated off from everything above it, and besides Pakistan, there's really not a lot there. We often think of India as an island. So let's say even China is able to capitalize on Southeast Asia. It is still surrounded by a ring of major powers that would want to block it as well. So, when China's thinking about how to break out of not just the first island chain, but the second and the third and all of these other issues, China really, it helps them as much as possible to have positive relationships. And the more that China gets pushy, probably, the weaker it is in terms of getting what it wants from those countries, but also it has bigger fish to fry sort of outside of that. So, look, China has a very difficult game here. When you look at just look at Southeast Asia and you understand sort of just how difficult this is going to be for China. China's not the only player, and they have other countries that they have to deal with.
Yeah, and I would suggest just to add. Basically everyone in Southeast Asia except for Thailand has really rough memories of colonialism and the Cold War and World War II, and they are as a result, they're very reluctant to get caught in between these countries, and so it remains to be seen. They do not want to serve as like the battlefields between this emerging coalition of India, Australia, Japan, the U.S., and then China on the other side, as much as possible. So, but they inevitably that's the battlefield if it comes to that.
And this is actually how I think Southeast Asia ties into our earlier conversation about North Korea and South Korea, because those Southeastern Asian countries are definitely, I think, looking at the United States and seeing, okay, well, where did the United States draw its line? And then did the United States follow through on its line? The U.S. had a red line about North Korea is not going to have nuclear weapons that are going to reach the United States. If the U.S. can get an assurance that there are no nuclear weapons that can threaten the United States, it can maybe save face a little bit and walk out of a North Korea agreement. It can at least kick that can down the road. If Kim is looking to embarrass the United States and exact a price, the United States might want to go along with that, but then the dreaded credibility question comes up, because if you're Southeast Asia and you see the U.S. reneging on commitments to, say, Japan or South Korea, maybe you start looking for other help to push back against China, or maybe you be one of the first countries to flip to China if you think that's the region that direction is trending. So in that sense, what's going on in Korea, like I will say flippantly sometimes that the Korean Peninsula doesn't matter that much. I'm just saying in terms of grand strategic issues, the actual who controls the Korean Peninsula, not so important. But what happens as a result of what the U.S. does and what its credibility looks like after Trump meets with Kim, well, a lot of that will ripple throughout the region, and then how those different countries respond, tie into China, to Japan, all these other things.
That's just about all the time we have for today. But Phil, do you want to jump in with anything else before we go? You don't feel obligated to if you don't want to. We're just three guys talking here about Southeast Asia. We could talk a lot more about it. We haven't talked about like Chinese tariffs. Or U.S. tariffs, steel and aluminum tariffs on China. We haven't talked about like free trade and the death of TPP and all this. Like, there's like
we didn't talk about the United States and an aircraft carrier.
Like, there's like so much more that we could like unpack. And like, there's just not enough time and not enough hours in the day. But if you have anything else, speak now or forever hold your peace.
We should probably do another half hour just on Thai food alone. So maybe next time.
Are you a Penang guy?
I'm a big Penang guy.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
Maybe Anthony Bourdain will call one of us to go eat food in Southeast Asia.
Oh man, that's my dream.
No, like we're being a little glib right now, but Southeast Asian food is objectively like the best food in the entire world, and I'm not going to hear any argument to the contrary.
Well, no, but I'll even, because I'm a nerd, I can even tie this back to geopolitics too, right? Because if you want to have a sense of how the Obama administration, how the Trump administration are different yet the same, like look at the way they interacted with that. Like Obama went to Vietnam and had a picture taken of himself like eating noodles in like a regular old noodle shop, right? I really wish I had a picture of like the Secret Service detail and everything else that was around it that had to be insured just so he could go into this like random street shop.
Like just some photo op.
But that was the image of the United States that Obama wanted to spread. We're just like one of the guys having noodles in your noodle shop, Vietnam. Like we are not a threat anymore. We don't want to do anything. Trump is a very different thing, right? He's like, no. Like Kim, fine, whatever. Let's have a cheeseburger. Like maybe I'm gonna send some aircraft carriers to threaten you, this, that, or the other thing. They are both trying to do the same thing. They are both trying to reassure their alliance network. They are both trying to expand the alliance network. They are both trying to get China to rein in line. So very, very different unorthodox styles. But when we talk about sort of the threads of geopolitics that constrain and which make similar administrations in all countries, not just the United States, look the same, actually, oddly enough, the U.S. relationship to Southeast Asian food can work in. Was that I thought that was a nice move.
Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, the gymnastics were like very impressive, and it actually like worked. Like it actually makes a little bit of sense. So, which is to say that like tactics can change, but like the grand strategy, once like if properly conceptualized and followed, like remains the same. And that's like what's like more at the heart of geopolitics than that. So thanks for putting a nice little bow on this for me. That was like you did all the hard work for me. Phil, thank you so much for joining us. You're back in town, so we want to have you again very, very, very soon. I'm Cole. That's Jacob. It's Philip. See you all next time.
For more geopolitical insights from the team at Geopolitical Futures, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter using the link in the description.